Good day, sir.
Good day. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule to meet with us. We just want to talk to you briefly about some of your experiences through practicing law and serving on the bench. And I think that makes the most sense to start from the beginning. Can you tell us just a brief description of your experience from law school and how it's moved on from there?
Well, I ended up at Duke Law School after going to the University of Florida. And that was back in 1966 or 69. And I look back in those times, they were pretty tumultuous with the Vietnam War and all. We were the last class to get through with a deferment. Everybody that came after us had draft issues. So those were interesting times. Also in Durham, North Carolina, there were a lot of racial issues which affected us in law school too. But it was a really good class. Everybody came from all over the country, and we had excellent professors. But when I started to think about where to practice, ultimately I came back to Miami. And one of the reasons I did was that Jerry Wetherington, who later became chief judge in our circuit court, was working at the county attorney's office in the time and was on leave to teach at Duke. So he said, well, why don't you come back and spend some time with me over Christmas? So I did, and he took me around to hearings and depositions and all while he was in the county attorney's office. And I thought, that's a pretty good place to work. So I talked to Jerry Wetherington and others who had graduated from Duke who practiced in Miami, and there were only a few of us. And they said, well, you know, you ought to get a clerkship. So I applied, and I applied here in the federal court, and Judge Cabot said, well, I'd like to offer you a job, but I don't know if my clerk is going to stay another year. So then I went over and I met with Judge Charles Carroll on the 3rd District Court. He was chief judge at the time. And he never hired anybody except from Harvard. And so I came in, and I was kind of worried about the interview. And I was wearing my only suit, which was like a gray wool suit with a vest and a blue shirt and whatever. And that's exactly what he was wearing. So I said, you know, maybe I have a chance for this job. Well, he did hire me, and I accepted because I was worried. I couldn't wait around, and I didn't want to go back to Miami without a job. So I accepted, and I had just a wonderful year clerking with Judge Carroll. It was like a postgraduate degree in jurisprudence, and it affected my entire career, and also it started the process about whether one day I wanted to serve on the bench sometime later in my career.
Had you always wanted to be a lawyer from even a young age?
I never really thought much about it. I thought about just getting into college. I was not stellar in high school and really turned things around in college, but you know, my family was, hey, you ought to be a doctor. Well, I was terrible in chemistry and math, and after one semester at the University of Florida taking chemistry and math and other sciences, I thought, I got to get out of this. And I switched to political science, and from that point, it was terrific. And I did pretty well, but then, you know, what do you do with political science? Either you go in and teach, or you go to law school, and I figured, no, I'd be better off going going to law school. So it wasn't any kind of driving desire on my part to be a lawyer, although that became clear as I was in law school.
Well, you mentioned a few individuals by name, a couple different folks. Are there any other people that influenced you in your early years that really kind of directed the course that you were going to take?
I really look back and consider myself very fortunate. At each stage of my practice, I work with some absolutely fantastic people. When I went with the county attorney's office, Tom Britton was county attorney back then, and then Stuart Simon followed him. And both were just excellent lawyers and real examples for the rest of us to follow. And we had a unique bunch of individuals in the county attorney's office back in those early days. And then when I went with Greenberg Trorig, I had some of the best mentors around as lawyers, as community leaders, and also ethical practitioners. I worked very closely with Bob Trorig over those years, but also with Mel Greenberg and Larry Hoffman and the others there. And Mel was a fantastic leader of our law firm. I guess back in 1975, I was number 23 to join the firm. Whoever thought that firm would have grown into this international organization? It was not Mel's vision. He wanted us to stay in Miami primarily, but over the years he began to realize that the firm needed to expand some, first in Florida and then elsewhere. Later, Reuben Askew joined the firm, and I worked very closely with him and actually campaigned for him in New Hampshire when he decided to run for president of the United States. And he was a tremendous influence on me as well, and I spent a great deal of time talking with him about public service. So I had wonderful mentors at Greenberg Trorig, and it took a lot of years to start thinking about other things. I was there 17 years as a partner and had a very diversified practice.
Sir, let me ask you a little bit more about, was it Mel Greenberg, did you say?
Well, he was
the leader?
The numero uno of Greenberg Trorig while he was healthy, and then Larry Hoffman took over.
Let me ask you, you mentioned that he was a huge impact on your life in the beginning. What was it that made him such a great leader? What characteristics did you see coming from him that inspired you, inspired the firm to grow, and really kind of kept it on the right path?
Mel was totally unique, but so was Bob Trorig and Larry Hoffman as the founders of the firm. Each had a skill set that balanced each other's. Very substantial talents. Mel had a tremendous insight into people, and one of the most brilliant minds I've ever come across. I mean, he was part Sherlock Holmes, he was part Shogun, but he also was, a very warm and friendly person when he wanted to be. But he could be very effective in terms of putting a hammer down on circumstances which jeopardize the firm as an entity. So everybody really respected Mel. He set salaries, and no one ever questioned. It was the assumption that he would do the fair thing, and that's unusual. we all felt that we had the opportunity to practice as best as we could in a very good firm in terms of how it was run, what the ethics were, what the potential was for growth, and the money was great back in those days. The firm did very well. So, as far as I was concerned, I never thought about leadership. Mel would always say, we're going to do just great as long as we don't do anything stupid. And the only thing he did that I had strong disagreement with at some partners meeting, one of the only times I spoke up, Mel decided that we needed a policy on Saturday mornings, that lawyers ought to come in and work on Saturday mornings in an official way. Well, most of us worked over the weekend, but whether we came in Saturday mornings or the afternoon, but Greenberg was there on Saturday mornings, and he walked the halls and checked who was there. And I said, man, Mel, that might not be a good idea, because it's going to get out in the community that we're a sweatshop or something by some of our competitors. So we did it. And sure enough, that's what happened. Everybody started talking about Greenberg, Troy. You don't want to go there because it's a sweatshop. They work you to death, Well, eventually that policy went away, but he would never admit he was wrong.
Well, it sounds like he was a people person, or at least had a good insight into people. Do you think how important do you think that is in our practice of law, understanding how relationships are with people?
I think it's essential. Mel would make each lawyer feel like there was a personal relationship. He'd come in your office and you figure, oh man, what did I do now? But he'd just flop down in the chair, sort of hang back and say, this is gold. He says, what a guy, what a story. Tell me what's going on. And so you would tell him, well, Mel, I settled this case recently. He says, well, you settled that case. How many billable hours is that we didn't get? So in a way, he always kept you a little bit off balance, but he knew people, he knew how to run a firm, and we all greatly respected him. But my main time was with Bob Troig, who was the absolute master of being a people person. He had a charm and grace and a style that I just marveled at under any circumstance. And he was one of the most charitable men I've ever met, and in a way where people did not know where the charity was coming from. He wasn't there to get his name on some plaque. He was there to help people as they needed it. As the firm was, even when Larry Hoffman took over after Mel got sick and Hurricane Andrew came, Larry Hoffman made sure every single employee of that firm was taken care of and helped during those hard times. And that was true when lawyers went into hard times, medically or otherwise. Firm stood behind its people. And that was a very important thing. So I thought, even though we all worked very hard and very professionally, that there really was a strong community base of support for us as lawyers in the firm, and that if you did well, you didn't do anything stupid, you could grow in the firm and have a future. And that was a unique time in the Miami community. Not that many people left the firm. People came on and and the firm grew in different directions and new areas of practice, but it was very stable over those years until I left in '92 and went on the circuit bench.
How do you think the practice of law has changed, and what do you see as the major challenge facing the profession now that may have been different when you were starting out as a new lawyer coming into the practice?
The practice of law has changed greatly. But then again, it changed when Greenberg-Treurig started. Before then, there was a whole different way of practicing. You work with a firm, you worked hard, you always believed that when you reached your later years, the others would work hard and you can relax, and everybody would support each other. It was very rare people to move from firm to firm. It was a very traditional practice. Well, then the Greenberg style came in, applying the New York business practices to law. And everybody thought we were upstarts. And then Governor Askew joined, and the firm started to take off even more. But it applied a whole different approach, a very business approach in terms of billable hours and collections and the like. And that started a whole new trend in Miami. I think, especially with our economic times, that the practice in some ways has gone so far extreme into the business model that we've lost a lot of what was important in the professional model. Also, as a community of practitioners working together and feeling a common bond. Now, it's the observation, not only my own, others, as you read the Daily Business Review, that lawyer so-and-so is leaving this firm, going down the street, taking this group with them. And it's almost like musical chairs among law firms. And you certainly can understand that people want to go where they feel they have the best opportunity. But something else is lost when you're not with a group for a number of years that practice together, trust each other, hard times, good times. That made a big difference. And when it's all economics and it's you eat what you kill, it produces just tremendous stress on lawyers. And then the clients come in with their expectations, and that produces tremendous stresses on lawyers to win under any circumstance. Keep that client, win that beauty contest to get the client. And that's different. Client relationships are different. We had clients that were close social friends, or if not that close in friendship, you have professional friendship and relationship and trust. And sometimes you don't always win, but they stuck with you because more times than not you were going to do right for them. And they always believed that you cared about them. And you fought hard for them or negotiated hard because you cared about them as individuals, not just because they were going to pay you a fee. And I think that's not always so true today. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's a lot harder when the economics are dictating, particularly general counsel, that they squeeze the law firms and the law firms start squeezing the lawyers. And what I end up seeing is a lot of lawyers under tremendous stresses. And one of the things that have gotten my attention in the last few years is that very subject. And ties into this issue of civility. Now, I'm not saying when we didn't have emails and Blackberries and now the latest technology that everything was great, but it was slower. Today, everything is instant in the legal world, and that puts even more pressure on attorneys, courts too, for that matter. So, how do lawyers accommodate these extreme stresses that continue over time relentlessly? And some don't do as well as others. Some handle them very well. But the science is very clear that extreme stress over time can either make you sick or sicker if you already have a problem. And what I've seen is it builds up to a point where there's a trigger, and that lawyer is just out of control and going down the slippery slope. And at that point, there's no way to stop it. And you see that in arguments. You see a lot of that in the discovery context, especially when there aren't judges around or special masters to monitor. And that's produced another dimension to the practice, which has always been there to some extent, but I think has made it even more challenging. So my tension in the last few years has been, well, what do you do about that? Do you solve that project through more sanctions? Is that the way to go? Maybe, as the Florida bar suggests, now a grievance can be filed against on professional conduct. I mean, that's just going to add more stresses. Or do you really begin to talk about the root causes of the problems and how do you deal with them? And so that's the direction that I started to talk about more with lawyers. And it's interesting what the responses are, because most lawyers are a little reluctant to get into this discussion because they think it will affect how they're perceived. If they start talking about mindful practice of law or taking time during the day just to relax, breathe, and meditate maybe, and regain their center, that this would be a weakness. But actually, I think the reverse is true. I think the real challenge is learning how to balance all of this and become more effective, more in control of your situation in the firm, the courtroom, and your life. You live a healthier life, hopefully, and a happier one. How do you get there? Well, that's a longer discussion, but it's doable, and it's very encouraging to see that a very large firm in town is considering a pilot project to implement some of these changes to help their lawyers and begin to bring back perhaps some of the aspects of practice that appeal to all of us in the early days.
What do you think that we can be doing better even with law schools to try and get at this issue of balance a little more? Obviously, there's initiatives, but how do we start to get the rest of the profession to understand this?
Many law schools are looking at that question. And there's a fundamental question of what's the goal of law school? Is it to teach the student just to be a lawyer, to sharpen the minds through the Socratic method, to terrorize the student into learning? Or are you also responsible for helping that student understand that there are going to be stresses not just in law school, taking exams and competing with each other, but getting out into the profession? And that the profession owes the student at least an exposure to how to begin to cope with that thing. I'm not talking about the individualized problems of students, but some schools are integrating into their curriculum courses on how to do this better, how to handle these problems better, how to be more effective as a lawyer and as an individual in life, because both interplay. You know, you're not just a lawyer, there's the rest of your life too, and it merges. So it's a dilemma for law schools, but a number of schools have begun to integrate this type of approach and teach it. University of Miami, for instance, locally. And I was just at Florida International University Law School yesterday talking with a group of professors and students and the dean about it. The real problem is right now in the economy that not too many lawyers graduating are able to get jobs. Big firms are cutting back on how they're hiring, who they're hiring, and even if they do hire, whether they're going to remain viable. I mean, whoever thought that Dewey law firm in New York would implode? So that's a big problem for law students who are graduating into the profession. They don't have that immediate job, the immediate kind of mentoring that I was fortunate enough to have. And they need to find some niche to gain an expertise to then move in as a lateral somewhere along the line. Who mentors them? How do they learn to be lawyers? Particularly if they want to be litigators, who teaches them? Even when they go with a firm, the firm can't afford to teach the lawyers because the client's saying, I'm not going to pay for your associate to sit with you in court. You want to do that, it's on your dollar, but not on mine. So there's a financial disincentive. Or the firms say, I don't want a first year working on my matter. That is, the firms are being told this by the clients. So who teaches a young lawyer skills? And it's getting harder. I guess we're as guilty as anybody here in the federal courts because it's more tempting often to hire as a law clerk somebody who's had several years of experience than somebody just graduating from law school. Now, there are a lot of reasons to hire from law school, and you really can help and shape somebody into a good lawyer. By the time you get them after several years working for a firm, they may have a lot of bad habits. But that's part of the tension, too. You have a surprisingly large number of very talented young lawyers who want to come back and learn how to litigate and really understand how to practice law. Well, coming to a clerkship gives you that unique opportunity to do that. So that's also a problem that I know Dean Acosta mentioned, that he sees less opportunity for his graduates to go on to clerkships. I guess other law schools see the same, except perhaps the top 10.
Let me ask you a question that I think I would personally like to know. What do you love about being a judge? Well, for me, what I love is the independence of it. To be there to make your decision based on precedent, but also what you really believe is the correct legal result, to do what's right, and to do that without having to answer anybody except, the appellate courts. That's worth the price of admission. You have the absolute opportunity to participate in the legal system in a very unique way. Being a federal district judge is just a great job because it gives you that independence, which you can exercise hopefully in a positive way that reaches the right result and also upholds very important principles that tie this country together. I believe firmly in that, and it gives you a chance to
to work with jurors. Now, that sounds quaint almost, because particularly in the civil side, there's less and less jury trials. But I have been here, going on almost 15 years, maybe more, watching jurors handle very complicated matters and doing extraordinarily well with that. Even the most complicated matters often turn on matters of interrelationship, and jurors understand about that. I go back in the jury room after every case and thank the jurors for their service. I don't talk about the case very much, but they take their work very seriously, and we as an institution are educating them about our democratic principles, and it changes them. One of the best stories was one woman on a jury, a very difficult case involving child pornography and complicated internet issues. Just before deliberations, sent a note and basically said, "Judge, I'm not sure I can do this." So we talked with the defense attorney and the government, and everybody agreed I ought to talk to her. So I said, what's the issue? You know, we've talked about your responsibility, and you base your decision on the evidence in the trial and my instructions, etc. She says, well, I'm looking at the defendant's mother sitting behind him, and I'm a mother, and it's really troubling to me. Well, you know, can you put that aside and go through the whole usual thing? Yes, I can. Well, I thought she was going to be gone by the motion of one side or the other. But both let her stay on. The jury came back with a guilty verdict, and when I went in there to talk with the jury, she said, Judge Gold, do you mind if I bring my children here to see the jury room and see the courtroom and see what I did and where I was doing it? I said that'd be an honor. So she brought her two children, I guess they were 8 and 10, and the boy was all dressed up and the girl was all dressed up, and so I took them in the courtroom. I sat them down in the judge's seat, and they banged the gavel. They sat them in the lawyer's seat, sat them in the juror's seat, and took them in to where their mother deliberated. And they were just filled with wonder. And the boy said, Judge Gold, do you think I could be a lawyer? I said, you could be whatever you want to be. You could even be a judge and sit in that chair. Oh, I said, that's what I want to do. And I thought, well, you know, isn't it the height of something? So that's what being a judge to me offers, both the opportunity to exercise judicial independence and discretion, but also play a part in keeping our traditions alive and hopefully carrying them down over the years.
One of the things that you started talking about earlier was the term mindfulness. And can you tell me what that means and how that relates to the practice of law?
Well, it's a pretty broad area of discussion, but I'd like to focus in on what it means for both lawyers and judges. I mentioned the tremendous stresses that both the bench and the bar find themselves confronting on a regular basis. And there are instances where bad things happen because people are so overly tired and stressed and are not in control. So how do you deal with that? And the science tells you that there is an action and a reaction to different matters that happen, and you're triggered. You're triggered by your habits and patterns to those things. But in between the action that happens and your reaction to it, there really is a gap, a small gap. Now, often it doesn't seem that way. It seems like somebody says something and, bang, the hammer goes down on the other side. Mindfulness is about taking a step back and objectively being an observer of that situation while you're a participant. And you say, oh, look at this. Same old stuff. I'm being triggered again. And right at that point, it's possible to make a choice about how to react, how to engage. Now, why is that important? I think, a characteristic of great lawyers and maybe great judges are those who are able to do that and control themselves, and in that manner take best advantage of a situation. I often compare it to martial arts. You flow with the situation. You use your opponent's motion and energy as a way of dealing with your individual situation. It's not a unique concept. It's been studied for thousands of years. And in a way, that's what we're practicing. Legal martial arts, for a better term. That you can actually use a situation to your advantage to be more effective if you're aware of what that situation is and how you are acting and reacting to it. Now that takes some conscious thought and being mindful of where you are in it. That means that you're in control and your habits and patterns are not. Well, that sounds pretty good, but it's very hard to do because we all are the result of a lifetime of habits and patterns. Now, how do you break that? How do you learn these skills? Well, that's what we're beginning to talk about. That's where the effectiveness component comes in. And it's, if for no other reason, if you can say to a lawyer, look, if you spend a half hour with me, you walk out of here with skills, you can be more effective. They'll listen to you. If you say, not only that, with these skills, your stress level can be reduced and you can be healthier and not find yourself so fatigued that you can't even concentrate and focus. They'll listen to you. But there's something even deeper than that. It's called life. How are you going to live your life? What are you going to do as you engage with people? Are you really going to listen to the situation, to what other people are telling you? Or is your mind constantly clicking away, thinking about what you're going to do, what you're going to say, and you don't pay attention? I see that so often with lawyers in the courtroom. I'll ask a question, and the worst thing a lawyer can do is interrupt in the middle of a question, because the lawyers worry the question is not going their way. So they think, well, if they interrupt the judge, he or she is not going to think about what it is that is about to happen. It doesn't work that way. The really skilled attorneys will listen very carefully and will come back and use that as an opportunity to say, here's a direct response. And while the other side has some very valid arguments about this, this is why these arguments for our side are more convincing based on the precedents, which I know you have studied carefully. And you listen to that and you say, well, that's very fair and reasonable. And that gets at least my attention. I think that's a skill. You learn that skill. And so that's an example of mindful practice at the moment. And it can be replicated in negotiations, relationships with your partners, with your family. It's really, how do you live your life kind of issue, but it has direct application to the practice. And the other part of that is the recognition that we're all in this together. You know, it may seem like everybody is pulling against each other, rowing with different oars in different directions. But really, bench and bar, we're all in this together. We're all trying to do something that is called the justice system, civil or criminal. And when you just lower the tension level and give each other more of a break and understand that that other person is under stresses too. I think the level of intensity goes down, and people are able to do better with each other and with the court. Now, some may question that. Some may say, well, it's that intensity that makes that lawyer worthwhile. The clients will go to the meanest dog in town because that dog gets results. But do they? Really? Maybe the perception, but do they? And is that really what we want in our practice of law? Is that the kind of professionalism that we aspire to? And the interesting statistic from the Florida bar surveys is a very significant number of lawyers around the state criticize the profession and say, I'm very unhappy about the profession because of the lack of professionalism. So if that's true, then what are you going to do about it? You know, we're just going to sanction people more, pass more bar rules? Is that the answer? I don't think so. I don't think that's the full answer. I think we have to look at this more human side of the problem and help people understand that they can be even better and improve the bottom line economically, while at the same time being professional in their work and with the other lawyers, be it in the firm or those you deal with every day. I think it's doable.
Let me ask you a question that I've asked people before. How do you convince young lawyers that are coming into the practice to be professional because you're going to be rewarded? The way you've just described, kind of if you act professionally, blessings will come. And in some ways you have to have faith that it will come. How do you convince a young lawyer who has high student loans and can't find a job, and how do you convince them to do the right thing while they're facing such great challenges?
The only way you can do it is by living it. If the young lawyers come out and they see this is actually the reality of practice, that it's a priority of the firm, this is the way we do business, then they're going to adjust to that. If their reality is, I don't care what you have to do, what ethical detour you have to make, you get this done, you get it done right now, or you're out of here, then that's their reality, and that's a big problem. So how do you make a fundamental shift in a profession that's going all to the other side where it's just business, at every level? And I think that it's going to be hard to turn the ship around, but it's going to implode on its own if it's not turned. And the reason for that is clients are not going to pay. The billable hour ultimately is going to be a demise of the legal profession because inherently there's a conflict with the client. If the firm is pushing its young people to bill all these hours, some of them are not going to be real. Well, if the partner passes it on to the client's going to say, you're not being professional with me. You're not billing me for your real time. I'm not going to use your firm. I'm going to go down the street. And so more and more the clients, particularly the general counsels of large companies, are moving away from billable hours into other economic arrangements. And so the profession is going to have to adjust. Maybe we're not going to do as well as we have done. Or maybe we can do better economically by even lowering rates and having more business. Or cut expenses. Somebody came up with a model once I thought was really interesting, to send lawyers to the clients' offices and let the lawyers do the work in the offices with the client, almost like an in-house counsel. The law firm was relatively an inexpensive base to run because you really didn't need that high rent. And the rates were lower because you didn't have the high expenses. But the clients loved it because you had the lawyers right there and the relationship again, the trust was built. I thought that was a very unique way of going about things. Of course, that's not the model. But my prediction is that certainly within the next 5 years, we're going to see significant changes in the way practice goes on because of just our national economy, world economy. And it's not going to be true for everybody, but we're all going to have to make adjustments and then make decisions about what's really important. What do we value? A lot of people come up at the end of the day and look at the assets they acquired or their bank accounts and say, look at me, I value this. At the loss of their health, their friendships, their professional relationships, their ethics. So what do they really value? And I think there's going to be more of a turn in the direction of redefining that because a lot of people are not happy with the end result. And there's going to have to be a turn on the judiciary as well to work more with lawyers and help them solve their real problems and not just be hard about deadlines and the like. We have a big case management issue. And the state courts, it's a disaster now with all the foreclosures and all. But in the federal courts, we have to run efficiently. And I'm not in any way minimizing the need for case management. But when you deal with case management against giving a case the opportunity to reach its fair result and just result, well, you tell me, which is more important? For me, there's no question about it. I'd sacrifice a date to help a case reach a fair result. I don't think it's a fair result for a judge to impose a deadline so strictly to force an artificial settlement just because everybody is not prepared to go forward. But that's a personal philosophy, and there's no right or wrong on it.
On a personal philosophy question, knowing what you now know about the practice of law and your experience being a lawyer and then a judge, would you recommend a son or a grandson or a granddaughter or someone in your family to go and be a lawyer and be a judge?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just had a granddaughter. So, yeah, I tell her, It's a wonderful profession. It would be a great honor to serve on the bench because at its core, lawyers are truly there as defenders of the defenseless and to really make a difference in our society. Yeah, we have strayed and we've had some bad people do some very greedy things. But that's not the core, I think, of the legal profession as a whole. I think down deep you have those roots which are tied to good aspirations. And yes, I would say it's worth it all. And you can find your way in it. You can find your way in it. To live your life financially well, do well, but do good at the same time. You can do good as a lawyer in the profession and as a leader in the community with your skills to help other people along the way.
How do you define professionalism?
Well, there are many rules out there that define it by what it's not. I'd rather define it for what I think it is at its essence. And when you really get down to it, it is just fundamental good human behavior, where you're treating people with respect, your profession with respect, and doing your best job for your client without going out of your way to, in an unethical manner, take away from the other side's position. And just an example, what kind of person are you if you know there's a case that is against you, and you're going to have problems with this if it's known, and the other side doesn't bring it up. You go into federal court before that judge, and you don't mention it. At the essence, what kind of person are you? And do you really think that judge has not done his or her own research, independently or with the law clerk, to be prepared? And I've had this situation. And I've said to the lawyer, you've never mentioned this case. Are you aware of it? Yes, I am. I said, well, you ought to be aware of it because your name is on the opinion as having represented the party. Why didn't you tell me about it? I decided it didn't apply. I said, that's not your decision. It's my decision. Your responsibility is tell me why you think it doesn't apply. Well, in that short exchange, I completely lost confidence in that lawyer as a professional. I would not believe another word that he or she said. I don't want to tell you more about the lawyer, but once that is gone, it's gone forever, because judges talk to each other just like lawyers do and say, you know what happened today with that case? That lawyer, did you ever have that lawyer in a case? So it gets back to what are you willing to do or not do to achieve your goals? What are those goals? Have you really thought that thing through? Because the definition of those goals tie greatly into the issue of professionalism. And if those goals take you off in a different direction, there's nothing you wouldn't do to win, to increase your economic status, and perception in the community. And I think in the end of the day, it's an empty suit. And either something is going to happen to you where all that falls apart, just like it's happened to a lot of people who we have seen in the community, or you end up feeling very empty. So I think the issue of what is professionalism is really an issue of what is at your core. What is your core belief in what is the right or wrong thing to do? And how are you going to live with that?
What are your core beliefs that have helped you throughout your life?
Well, I can't claim I haven't made a multitude of mistakes, both as a lawyer and as a judge. But I think at the core of it, I believed as a lawyer that I had a duty to the client which was just beyond the professional stage. I felt strongly that there was something else there that linked me with that client in a way that client could trust me, that I really cared about the client and the client's issue. And it's a very personal relationship. And the client trusted that I would act appropriately on its behalf. And where courage was needed to take that step, and to do that. Same thing as a judge. I think there are times when there are situations that confront you as a judge where you know that you're swimming upstream. I'm not saying there is an illegal basis for you to do so, but you know that this decision is going to create, let's put it this way, controversy. It's not going to be popular or whatever. And can you do that? Do you believe that strongly in the principles behind the issue, that you're willing to take that step and take it on the chin no matter what? And some famous author wrote that you can't get married to the result. You can't always trust that the result is going to be there in your favor. But that doesn't mean that the effort, for the effort's sake, for the sake of the principles of it, are not important, and perhaps what the whole thing is really about. And so at times I've had to wrestle with that issue. And I think when I look back, those are the times I'm most proud, where after doing this job I can, walk away and say, I stood up to what I thought I had to do under those circumstances, and I feel good about it.
If you were absolutely guaranteed that your advice would be followed, what would be your advice to those in the legal profession?
Well, some wise person once said, "Don't listen to me. Test it, see if it works for you, and if it's the right thing, then do it. But don't do it because I said so." I think that's true for me as well. I don't proclaim to have any answers. I can only tell you my experiences. So I don't know that I would have the magic bullet to pass on to the next generation. I would just say your challenge would be to look at three questions. Who am I really at the core? Who am I? And why am I really doing what I'm doing? And what am I willing to do or not do to do it? How far am I willing to go? And I guess my advice would be keep asking those questions, because the answers are going to change at each stage of your transition in your life. But some things are like threads that continue right through. And it's important to keep those things in mind, to put a perspective on where you're going. So it's not so much advice that I would give to anybody that you should follow this path. I think the advice at the end of the day is you got to keep asking yourself the right questions. And then really take a look at it honestly and determine, where am I going to go with this? A very personal journey, and not an easy one.
Well, very good. I think we're done. I want to thank you very much for taking the time, and hopefully you have enough time to get to your next engagement.
I do. I thank you, and thank you for making the time today.
Our pleasure. Thank you, sir.